Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe, if you dare. Before I had a chance to say anything, the teacher says, "Look at him, he needs to maintain his figure somehow." Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. What's the rudest/meanest thing a teacher has ever done to you? Number 1. In the 6th grade, my science teacher mistakenly thought I was chewing gum. She had a strict no gum policy for her classroom. She proceeds to yell at me and demand that I come to the front of the classroom to show her the inside of my mouth to check for the gum. On my way up, she hatefully spits, "And I hope you swallow it too because it's bad for you." I'm pretty sure she was the devil. Number 2. Commenter. When showing my 5th grade teacher my painting from art class, he said, "Why, you're not very good at art, are you?" Not as scarring as the other stories, but it made me self-conscious of my art skills, or lack thereof. Person B. Art teachers are the worst. It's like they live to kill creativity. Person C. Those who can't do teach. Number 3. Commenter. I have an anxiety disorder, dysgraphia, which makes foreign languages a bitch, and had terrible chronic migraines when I was younger, 2 to 3 plus a week, so I missed a lot of school and pretty much just got C's in an effort to just not get held back. I even did have to do summer school once though. My Spanish teacher knew about this but didn't really believe me, so one day she stood me up and grilled me. After flubbing through and barely getting anything right, she asked me in front of everyone, "Why aren't you getting this? Everyone else understands this. What on earth is wrong with you?" I just told her I guess I'm stupid and left. Luckily I grew out of the migraines, mostly, and graduated college with honors, and I am now a second-year medical student. So if you miss Cozell. Person B. Having dysgraphia, man, I know your pain. Person C. In 9th and 10th grades, my short gym coach would constantly harass me. He made fun of me almost every day, and encouraged others to make fun of me. Also, he graded me lower than others, split the class up in boy/girl teams, and made me play on the girls' team. Another coach forced me to jog repeatedly without my asthma inhaler. Lots of fun stuff. That was just the coaches though. Had a few jerk teachers too. Number 4. Commenter. 9th grade algebra class. I was pretty fat back in high school, and I had this bitch of a teacher. I forget why, maybe it was because I was fat, but I had a bag of candy in one of the pouches of my backpack, which broke open. When I opened the pocket to get a calculator out, like a half-dozen candies fell on the floor. The girl next to me says, "Why do you have so much candy?" Before I had a chance to say anything, the teacher says, "Look at him, he needs to maintain his figure somehow." Person B. That's kind of like my teacher, except he knew we were intelligent, so he called the smartest students dumb, and winked while doing it. However, he never went with the fat jokes. And we knew we could make every joke against him, and he'd laugh, except fat jokes. Never use fat jokes. Seriously. But yeah, your teacher is terrible, especially because he or she was a bitch beforehand as well. Number 5. Commenter. My friend was told by his 7th grade teacher that his autistic son could draw better than him. My friend replied, "At least I'll get better." My friend got suspended. Person B. What kind of parent uses their child's condition as the basis for an insult? Person C. Agreed. The teacher should have seen it coming and shouldn't have even brought her son into this. Furthermore, depending on where on the spectrum this kid falls, he could be a very talented artist. So unless you know the kid personally, it's not necessarily an insult. I know a few people with autism that are much better artists than I am. Number 6. Commenter. This didn't actually happen to me, but it was still pretty messed up. In 2nd grade there was a kid in my class named Eric. He was the fat kid in our grade, and in 2nd grade, he obviously got teased a lot for it. One of our teachers was an old grouchy lady, and she used to hate this kid for being fat. I remember her telling him to sit in the back of the class because he was too fat to sit in front and nobody behind him would be able to see. She used to call him Fat Eric all the time. She wouldn't let him answer questions and would tell him not to raise his hand. One day she actually hit him pretty hard in the back with a yardstick when he tried to walk past her. The next day she was fired. Person B. That is cruel and effed up. If I would have witnessed that, I would have told the people in the office or something. Commenter. Yeah, looking back on it, it was pretty bad. It's pretty much the only memory that stuck with me from 2nd grade. At that age though, the teacher was an authority figure and I didn't even think to report it. I told my parents when I got home, and I assume a lot of other kids did too because she was gone the next day. Number 7. Commenter. In grades 1 and 2, I had a pretty rocky relationship with my teacher that started off on the first day when the principal walked in, and I went up to him, told him his fortune with an origami, and from then on, the teacher was dead set on making the next 2 years as miserable as possible for me. One day, I was not feeling so well and my mother had made me a tuna sandwich, and after seeing it during lunch, I didn't feel like eating it, so I put it back in my lunch bag. The teacher saw this, and told me to eat it. I told her I was feeling sick. She refused to take no for an answer despite my pleas, while just responding with, "No excuses." Every bite was so difficult to take, and it lasted over the entire lunchtime and until the math period, where I tried putting it away until a kid snitched on me that I did that. Another time, she refused to let me go to the bathroom until I was physically shaking at my desk. Person B. Wow, that's effing cruel. I often wonder if any of these teachers look back at themselves and think, damn, I was nasty as shit to those kids. And the denial of bathroom would have earned a lawsuit in this day and age. Commenter. This happened in 1996 and I believe she said no because I didn't ask in the most polite manner I could have, although I wasn't being rude or anything. She probably thought I'd end up as a drug-addicted loser, but I ended up skipping a grade when I was 11 and received my engineering degree at age 21. If I see her on the streets, I'll probably let her know that she is an absolutely wretched and rotten person. Person C. My 3rd grade teacher told me no when I asked to use the bathroom after saying it was an emergency. I asked politely and didn't interrupt her or anything. I had already finished the assignment, and I was about to piss myself. I told her, "Go F yourself," and went anyways. She was always very rude to everyone, including other teachers and staff. Made a janitor cry because there was a very small amount of marker on the board in a corner. A wretched old bat she was. My parents were called and everything, and my dad told the principal to F off for wasting his time. And my mom told the teacher to stop being such a cunt. My mom had the same teacher when she was a little girl, believe it or not. I never asked to go to the bathroom after that. I just go. Number 8. Commenter. This is nothing my teacher said, but what she did. When I was in 1st grade, she locked me in a reading room in the library and left me there all day. My mother came to pick me up and couldn't find me. The teacher had forgotten about me completely. The local police were looking everywhere for me. I ended up locked in that room for the entire day, from about 9 in the morning to close to 5 in the afternoon. I was a rather troublesome child, but seriously. Lock me in a room all day? Person B. Jesus, around here, that teacher would have probably got a lot of shit from management, if not a dismissal. Duty of care and all that. Commenter. Yeah, if my mom had followed through with anything she may have, but my mom just pulled me out of that school and forgot about it, I guess. Twist ending. My head football coach in high school was her husband. He apologized to me for her and kinda gave me special treatment. Number 9. This is hard to talk about. When I was in 5th and 6th grade, I was bullied constantly by a lot of kids in my classes/grade. The teachers were never any help. They ignored it or sided with the bullies because, well, I think they just found it to be easier. In 5th grade, my teacher had a complaint book where the students could write in things they didn't like about the class or any issues they might be having with another student, and then we would discuss the contents every couple of weeks. Some girls who were particularly mean to me wrote in the book every day made up things that I had said or did, or just general insults about my appearance or the things I was interested in. When it came time for the class meeting, my teaching had the whole class discuss the terrible things in the book about me. They were the popular girls, so they had a lot of sway in 5th grade land, so the whole class just proceeded to list off the things they didn't like about me, and my teacher went around one by one giving them all a turn to insult and humiliate, all while shaking her head as if she was consensus. And when I would try to defend myself, she would scold me about how interrupting was rude, and maybe if I took in their advice I would have an easier time. Made me cry just writing that, damn. Number 10. Commenter. In 3rd grade, I was in an ESL class. I didn't speak English. On the first day of school, the teacher pointed at me and told me to do something. I did not understand a word she said, Spanish being my native language. She screamed at me for a while, and I cried because I didn't understand her. She was not sympathetic at all, and kept screaming at me. Finally, one of my classmates told me in Spanish what it was that she wanted. To take a paper up to the front office for her. Person B. Harsh much? Teachers. I had a teacher who would tell me to do something, and I'd be completely zoned out. I was really daydreamy and very sensitive at that time. She would walk over to my desk and slam her fists down on my desk and scream at me. Told me I would fail and amount to nothing every day. I always teared up at this and shrunk down in my seat, but one day it was truly awful. I had missed a few days of school and came back to a test I knew nothing about. She made me take it anyway. I failed, I think, and she yelled at me for not coming to get the work I missed while I was out. I lost it and started straight out bawling until I was nearly sick, and I never went back to her class. The teacher I was transferred to was my mom's childhood best friend. Number 11. Commenter. When I was in elementary school there was a kid in my class whose mother was teaching at the school. She was never assigned to the same class as him. I suspect this was done on purpose, but that didn't stop her from playing favorites. One recess, her son threw sand in my eyes. I was walking around rubbing my eyes and the teacher saw me and asked what happened. When I told her, she said, "Don't be a tattletale," and walked away. If I hadn't been 10 years old at the time I would have told her to go F herself. Person B. My grandpa was a vice principal and social science teacher and he refused to send my dad and aunts to the schools he taught at to avoid any sort of nepotism claims. Also I think he wanted a break from them. Number 12. Commenter. When I was in 3rd grade, we had a substitute teacher. I got it in my 3rd grade head that it would be funny to just be a little asshole all day. I guess I got her on the wrong day, because after a few hours of 3rd grader asshole antics the shit hit the fan. She was reading a book aloud behind me as I was still goofing off and talking to my friends loudly. I realized I was in the wrong as well, but what she did next was by far worse. She slammed the large book closed and screamed, "Shut your mouth," as she swung the book at the side of my head from behind me. She knocked me out of the chair and on the floor and continued to scream and yell profanity at the top of her lungs. I was given a pink slip, written note to your parents, and sent home by the sub. I explained what actually happened, with a little bit left out about my classroom disrespect, and god damn it did my mother raise hell. After a call to my father she decided her original idea to simply kill the sub for that day was not so good. She did however take me back to school and continued to pull the principal from a meeting. I was then sent back to class and when I returned the substitute was not there. The teacher from next door had taken over the class. I later found out that the substitute teacher was fired almost immediately after verifying with the students that saw it and my mother yelling, with the principal. Person B. Makes sense, 8-year-olds can be little shits, but you don't get to beat them for it. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time. Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe, if you dare. People, when in doubt, just go without. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. I was raped, no, we had sex? Number 1. Commenter. I know a guy who is now a sex offender for buying drinks for a girl in a bar, taking her home, and having sex with her. He was divorced at the time. She turned out to be underage, and her parents got him for statutory. He swears that she was the best jailbait he's ever seen. Guy can only see his kids with a cop present now. It's utter bullshit. Person B. He found a girl in a bar where you can only enter if you're 21 and up. Girl obviously lied about her age and he still got in major trouble. I find it hard to believe this would happen if the genders were reversed. Number 2. In college, I had a drunk girl, I was sober, climb into my bed, while I was sleeping, naked and try to force me to penetrate her. Naturally, I had a hard-on because, well, it's a naked woman, and she took that as evidence that I wanted to have sex with her. At the time, I was trying to start a relationship with her sorority sister, and had to decline physically and verbally several times before I finally escorted her out my door and locked it. I told my roommate to not let her in anymore. She eventually called me up and apologized, but she ended up telling a couple sorority sisters a watered-down version that made me sound sort of feminine. Apparently, I got a few jeers from them, but I didn't give too many FS because I had a nice fling with a much better girl. Maybe not horribly relevant to the issue at hand, but female-to-male rape can happen. Number 3. Commenter. I've actually studied some of the criminal procedures for rape cases. I'm not an expert, but in some jurisdictions words alone are not enough to accuse someone of rape, unwanted sexual penetration. In these jurisdictions, there has to be actual, physical resistance, more than just saying no, but actually pushing back to the point of resistance. In other jurisdictions, words alone are sufficient. What this suggests, what rape should be defined as, is still not 100% legally defined. The jurisdiction you're in determines your legal recourse. It is situations like this that make rape cases so difficult to determine. Person B, which is why rape cases aren't black and white. I work in the legal field, and I read hundreds of criminal court cases each week. At least where I live, Canada, it seems fair. I've read cases where a 13-year-old lied about her age, had sex with a 20-year-old, and claimed rape. The court ascertained that the guy did everything in his power to determine her age and she lied, so it wasn't statutory rape. I had a case where the victim claimed rape after a night of drinking and the guy was acquitted because, essentially, there was more to it than I can list here. They had fooled around, not exactly sex, but close to it, on other occasions and on that same evening. They had both been drinking and she didn't remember saying no. In that circumstance it was determined that as was probable she wanted to have sex but simply didn't remember because she was plastered. There was reasonable doubt that the guy took advantage of her. Other circumstances of drunken sex have been determined to be rape. It really depends on looking at everyone's side of the story and choosing what is logical. The case in question must have been a doozy. We're not given enough evidence in this little blurb to determine anything. Was she visually upset? Did they use protection? Did she immediately call the police? The courts look at every little detail to determine the outcome of the case, something we don't have in this instance. Person C. I worked for a public defender's office in the US for a few summers in high school, and even though we had a DA that campaigned on filing charges on all sex crimes, pretty much every date rape case that didn't end in a plea deal charges were either dropped or the defendant was found not guilty because it's ridiculously hard to beyond a reasonable doubt. Statutory rape on the other hand was very bad because it was provable and the DA was very good at putting away 19-year-olds with 16-year-old girlfriends. Person D. Putting away an 18-year-old with a 16-year-old girlfriend is wrong. Especially when they get put on a sex offenders list for life. Person E. I agree, when I was 16 I dated a couple of 18-year-olds, and had sex with them willingly. I think it's wrong that those boys could have been put away for doing something that I was fully compliant in. I think that's the sticking point with me though, they were boys, they're not grown yet either. In all likelihood, I would have been the one taking advantage of them. Number 4. Commenter. The girl messages the guy she's been on a couple dates with to come over. He brings some beers. They play video games, order a pizza. They're making out, wrestling, and end up on the bed. She says stop and he stops immediately and sits on the edge of the bed, and then she tickles him. They're tickling each other, she says stop again, and again, he stops and backs off. This happens a few times. So, they've just started and she lets out a weak little stop, but she said it like 5 times just playing right. So he doesn't stop and she doesn't say it again. And then she told her friend that he raped her. To me, I'm thinking, she's established stop as being meaningless. If she wanted him to stop, saying no, really, get off me would be a logical follow-up, not just using the same word you've used 5 times while playing around and only once and dropping it. Person B. On first reading the anecdote I was inclined to side with you because the way it was worded made it sound like the final weak stop was with regards to tickling which eventually escalated to sex. However, rereading the story it seems like they start having sex and the woman says stop. Whatever stop meant with regards to tickling is not what stop means with regards to sex. It's not possible to conflate the implied consent to tickling with the implied consent to sex. It just doesn't work that way. Person C. Everything in context. According to this story, all the stops were clearly communicated in the context of tickling/wrestling, which, yes, can lead to some pretty great sex. But, in every situation where I have had sex post-tickling, it's rough sex, meaning the girl is into it too even if she doesn't state it verbally, she definitely communicates it in her actions. A weak whisper, stop with no physical consent should be a huge red flag if you're having sex with a girl, or boy. Honestly, if I was about to have sex with a girl even if she didn't say stop, but just froze up physically, I'd be worried what the FK is wrong. Because in that case something is wrong, even if she wants to have sex. Person D. A lot of people are complaining that the girl in this scenario is making the word stop useless, which is arguable, but the fact is that she stopped him making sexual advances multiple times. Does that not construe in any way that she has a boundary she does not want to cross with him? I don't think that she handled the situation very well, but that does not give him an excuse to continue after being told to stop. He may not have thought of it as rape. I think he should educate himself about it and be more observant and wary in these situations, but she obviously did. It is a very traumatic, stressful, and demeaning thing to go through, the absolute opposite of what a sexual experience is supposed to be. Something that I was taught and that I will use if I ever encounter a man who doesn't think I'm being serious when I tell him to stop is to strongly say, "If you don't stop now, then I will consider this rape," which should get the point across. But not all women are courageous enough to say this directly, and nor should they have to be to stop unwanted advances. The word stop should always be more than efficient. Person E, unfortunately you don't get to decide how meaningless or meaningful a word someone else said is. Stop still means stop. It doesn't mean disregard what I'm saying just because you want something now and can explain it away later. Why did he stop all those other times and then suddenly decide he doesn't have to listen anymore? I certainly don't think that it makes him a predatory sort of rapist who is pure evil or anything like that, but there was a lapse of judgment, a crossing of boundaries, and perhaps lack of proper communication. This happens in other situations/aspects of relationships as well, but it is especially toxic regarding sex/rape. That is why you need to be extra cautious and actually listen when someone says stop, even if they are just joking. What's worse, stopping and not getting what you want, or ignoring someone's wishes and raping them? Number 5. Take no and stop at face value, guys. It could possibly prevent a lot of headaches. Seriously, if a woman is playing the game with you, get up and walk out. The possible legal and social ramifications are just not worth it. People, when in doubt, just go without. Number 6. I started thinking about how women react during sex. Now, I'm a woman, and I've never had sex with another woman, so I don't know how other women are. But from personal experience, I have never engaged in sexual activity where it might be ambiguous that I was into it. Meaning, I'm very much involved and my eagerness and enjoyment is pretty clear. Regarding cases such as this, where the suggestion is that the woman may not have made it clear that she was actually saying no, or stop, from a man's perspective, is it normal for women to be uninvolved during sex? Do any of the men in these situations ever wonder, why isn't she into this at all? I'm not saying that lying still is always a communicator for rape, but if I was a man and in a situation where I thought a woman wanted to have sex, and yet when I got there, it suddenly occurred to me that she wasn't giggling, moaning, pressing her hips into me, kissing me, etc., I'd start to question whether she was actually into it. I'm not sure I'd be into it myself anymore, even if she hadn't said no or stop. The lack of clear indication of enjoyment would make it feel one-sided, and therefore, not pleasurable. But, again, I'm not a man. Number 7. Commenter. This sounds like a very one-sided account of what actually happened that aims to justify his behavior. Even if it happened exactly as described, he should have stopped. I'm not sure I'd describe it as rape, but it was certainly bad behavior. It's his responsibility to check what is meant by stop, not assume she was joking/playing around. I can imagine her description sounding more like she was happy to flirt/have a tickle fight on the bed but didn't want to have sex. He kept pushing the tickling further than she was comfortable with. She said stop and just wanted to go back to playing around. He kept pushing it further and eventually got his way by just ignoring her telling him to stop. If you're with a new partner you don't know very well, you shouldn't assume you can interpret what they really mean. If she says stop, just stop and ask what the deal is. If you feel like she's being confusing or leading you on, just leave, don't have sex and justify it later. The girl shouldn't have to be forceful in turning you down. And not every girl reacts in a predictable way when she feels she has sex forced on her. Person B. Without knowing exactly what happened, it's tough to judge, but most likely you're right, she was setting boundaries. Her boundary was light making out and tickling. He probably wanted to go further, and she repeatedly let him get to a point she was comfortable with and stopped it. Pretty sure two things happened here. Number 1, she should have ended the night or clearly said this is how far we're going tonight when he repeatedly wanted to go further than she was comfortable with. 2, if a girl/guy says stop, you stop. If it's tickling etc., that's one thing, but if you're rounding third base going for home and you hear it, it's done. Over. Stop. Number 8. As a girl who has been sexually assaulted in a situation just like this, you go through a ton of mixed emotions. You stay stopped so many times that they become worthless. At some point you just give in and that's it. You do it because you're scared and you do it because there is nothing else that you can do. You can't say that she could have done more or she should have done this because you haven't been in the situation. It was probably the first time she felt that she wasn't in control. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, If you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time. Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe, if you dare. I pointed out to my grandmother and she goes over there and starts removing the sand around it, and she notices blood on the rock. She then pulls it out of the sand and it's a human skull. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. Campers, backpackers and park rangers of Reddit. What is the weirdest or creepiest thing you have found while in the woods? Number 1. Not me, but a buddy found a young kid, 16 I think, in the process of trying to hang himself about 5 years ago. He was hooking a makeshift noose up to a tree. Upon seeing my friend, he stopped. My buddy talked with him and they walked and talked. This lad was gay and his parents and family had disowned him when he came out to them. My buddy and his wife let him stay with them for a few weeks until he moved to a family member's house. They are still firm friends. Number 2. When I was a kid in the mid-90s, my friends and I were hiking around in the woods behind our house on some Weyerhaeuser timber property and found an abandoned farmhouse. The weird thing was that the house had been left very suddenly. There was still unopened mail and magazines sitting on the coffee table, all dated back to the same date in the 1950s. Sheets and blankets still on the beds, clothes still in the drawers, pantry full of canned and jarred food, half of it exploded or leaking after so many years. Dishes in the sink, dishes on the table. Unburned candles still sitting out waiting to be used. A fridge outside full of food that had turned to muck and dust. After exploring the house for a while, we checked out the farm. The chicken coop had dozens of chicken skeletons, wrapped in desiccated skins or picked bare. There were 2 pig skeletons in a pen, and the remains of a horse and several cows in the surrounding pasture. A tractor was parked in the garage, and was in great shape for its age. It didn't occur to me as a kid at the time, but aside from the house having been left so suddenly, it was really remarkable that the entire place was undisturbed. There was no vandalism, no sign of entry, and as far as I could tell, we were the first individuals to set foot in there in 40 years. Number 3. I had a relative that would seek out ghost towns and I went with him on a few of his excursions. Most of the time, you would find one that was relatively well known. Things were overgrown, but there would be signs of squatters/campers/hunters, vandalism, etc. One time he found out about a very small town that was abandoned in the 20s. After a ton of research, he loaded up supplies and planned a hike to see if he could find it. After several unsuccessful solo attempts, he brought me along. The hike started out at an old abandoned railroad junction that was itself 5 to 10 miles off the road. We followed a rail line for about 5 miles that kept diminishing as we went. Eventually we got to a point where there was no longer any sign of the railroad line and we kept going. He was an experienced hiker and he had a plan where he wanted to go this time. After about 15 or so more miles we found it. The town itself was very small. I think there were about 5 houses and a really small general store, think about the size of a small convenience store. Some of the houses were in relatively decent condition and a couple of them had been abandoned very quickly. Furniture and pictures left behind, clothes and other belongings packed but not taken, etc. It was surreal. We found a letter that was dated 1922, which was about the time that he speculated that the town was abandoned. The store had some product left on the shelves, but this was not like a store in the traditional sense. Maybe more like a trading post. There were a few advertising signs and a few boxes of soap flakes and canned items that we couldn't make out. I guess the story was that the town existed because it was on a rail line. There was a grain storage facility that originally was located a few miles away on the rail line. My uncle speculated that the people in the town either owned or ran the grain facility. The grain facility burned down and the rail line was diverted away. Thus the little town died. Or it could have been that the rail line diverted and then the grain facility burned down later. Either way. Like I said, I've been to a few ghost towns before. This was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The people that lived there were relatively well off, not rich, necessarily. This did not appear to be a farming community, like you'd expect. Everything just looked frozen in time. There were no roads anywhere nearby. The closest paved road was probably 30 miles away. It is possible that we were one of a handful of people who saw that place since it was abandoned. This place was out in the middle of nowhere. My uncle found out about the town by seeing a reference to it on a very old railroad map. Again, these were railroad lines that hadn't been used in over 50 years. Number 4. My cousin and I once stumbled upon a trailer home like this. We weren't hiking per se but just exploring the woods near my home. We had walked about a mile down an old dirt road and there was a sort of grown-up trail, later discovered to be a driveway. We decided to take it and see what was there. We found a very dilapidated trailer home that literally looked like the people had just left one day for work and never returned. Unopened mail, old checks that had been written and never sent, pictures on the walls, clothes in the closets. It was so odd. We live in a tiny town but no one seems to know who lived there or where they went. Number 5. I was like 12 and lived near the sand dunes. We used to hike there all the time. My grandmother came to visit so we both went on a hike and I see this weird circular rock in the sand. I pointed out to my grandmother and she goes over there and starts removing the sand around it and she notices blood on the rock. She then pulls it out of the sand and it's a human skull. We reported it to the police. So what happened was that this dude was killed by his roommate and he cut him into 5 pieces and buried each part in a different location in the sand dunes. We found the last missing piece. His skull. We were on the news. Pretty cool memory I have of my grandmother. Number 6. I was hiking in the woods on a property my father rented as farm ground with my older brother. After a while we noticed a sickly sweet smell. Being farm kids we knew what it was, something dead and left to rot. As we kept walking we entered a marsh-like area, soft, squishy ground and very tall grass. We had walked through marsh-like areas before so we walked on the large grass clumps, being very careful where we placed our feet. After making it to a large clump of solid ground I look up and find a massive pile of skinned animal carcasses. The pile was easily over 10 feet tall, with a 15-foot circumference. It consisted of every animal you could think of: rabbit, fox, coyote, deer, weasel, cat, dog, raccoon, and others I couldn't recognize. The old man that owned the land trapped year-round for anything he could get. He just kept throwing the carcasses in the same pile year after year. After we left the area it dawned on me, the marsh was not in a lowland like most marshy places. The group was just saturated with the decaying fluids of all those animals. That's also the reason the grass was abnormally tall in that area. Number 7. I've been homeless. A lot. I lived in some distant family's land where they have an old cabin up on stilts, due to the local woods flooding heavily sometimes. Illinois is weird. Anyway, I spent a good amount of time in this old cabin. Wood stove, porch swing hanging from the ceiling that I used as a bed. Overall, it was an okay place and it wasn't too far of a drive to town for food, you just had to tolerate the half-mile walk to your car. One day I am out walking around the woods and in a smallish clearing in the path, I easily see a good 50 to 60 dead geese. Every one of them is mangled in horrific ways, necks ripped off of the bodies splayed out over old timbers and fence posts, feathers everywhere. Bones sticking out of the dirt. It just looked like a straight-up goose genocide. The ground was dry, and there was a lot of dust, but I saw no prints, and there was no other evidence of anything being in the area aside from what one can only assume was some sort of strange breed of exploding goose. I also found a torn open old backpack and a great deal of candy wrappers strewn about it. Way too moldy to identify anything about it. I decided to turn back and see if I could grab a camera when I started hearing this god-awful shrieking noise, as if it were coming from every possible nook and cranny within a 30-foot radius. I took off pretty fast when that started. To this day, my best guess is some sort of massive commune of foxes. It really is the only rational solution I can come to. Still scared the shit out of me. Number 8. My parents own a small cabin and some land out in a remote area of Alberta. One day we came across a bunch of ANECDOSED, large stones stacked on each other to resemble, in this case, people. They were all dressed up, some in little girl dresses, children's jumpers, safety vests, parkas, some had hats on them, and all of them were seriously creepy. We had no idea where they came from or who put them there. We started making up scary stories around the campfire about this mystery person, and we started pulling pranks on each other. ANECDOSED suddenly erected overnight outside of our friend's tent. Lots of scary Blair Witch stuff to freak each other out. My mom went to this social event that the farmers and ranchers in the area put on every year. She mentioned the ANECDOSED to an old couple and they told her that their adult son with a variety of mental disorders put those up. Apparently they calm him down and it's very therapeutic for him. It was nice to know that a real person put those up and not evil forest spirits or an axe murderer. Number 9. Not really camping, but as kids we lived in a new neighborhood. It was next to about 400 acres of woods and old farmland. There were several abandoned houses and barns, equipment, and random junk. It was great to grow up there as we spent nearly every day exploring the area. But there was one house off the main road, but about 200 yards into the woods. It looked abandoned, but a woman lived there. We found out the hard way by trying to get into the house one day, and she came out screaming at us to get the hell off her property. She was scary looking as hell. She wore a dirty dress and had gross stringy hair, and looked like she hadn't taken a shower for years. She looked to be in her 30s. Needless to say, we stayed away from her most of the time. We also never told our parents because we knew that they wouldn't let us play back there anymore. We did go back sometime though. We named her Crazy Mary, and we'd spy on here, and dare each other to get as close as possible. Even then we never got closer than 100 feet from her house. About 10 to 12 years later I am home from college and my mom tells me about how they took this woman to the mental hospital. Apparently she lived there this whole time with her dead mother and father propped up in their chairs in the living room. They figured the parents were dead for 10 to 15 years, but died of natural causes, and Mary had propped them up in the chairs after they died. That meant they were probably freshly dead when we got chased away by Crazy Mary. Number 10. One afternoon I was completing this 14 kilometers, 5-hour, hike on the edge of town. It's an unkept track with uneven ground, overgrown, and in many places you rely on colored markers nailed into trees because the track is covered in grass. It's not the easiest hike, and it's into some pretty unforgiving terrain. We're all wearing hiking shoes, long pants and long sleeve shirts to minimize the risks of snake bites, cuts, etc. We were the only people on the track that day that we saw. It's late afternoon and we're about 2 kilometers from the remote trailhead. We come up onto this ridge and see somebody heading for us. We initially thought he was naked, but as he approached we discovered he was wearing budgie smugglers, speedos, and thongs, flip-flops for the Americans. He approaches on the track, says good afternoon, and continues wandering along the track. He's got 2 hiking poles, no bag or clothing other than the budgie smugglers, and no torch we could see. By the time we got back to the car it was dark. We hung around for a bit packing up the cars but didn't see the man emerge back from the trailhead. There were no other cars parked at the trailhead either. The country he was hiking into isn't very forgiving, and there's no easy way you can loop back to civilization except via the trailhead. He came prepared with hiking poles, but why was he only wearing budgie smugglers and thongs? I have so many questions for this man. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time. Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe, if you dare. In first grade, I decided to discover all the words that rhyme with duck in alphabetical order. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. What is the dumbest thing you have gotten into trouble for? Number 1. Commenter. I got detention when I was about 7 for sneezing in class. The teacher came over to our table and asked who made the noise, and the rest of the table pointed to me. My mom came in and spoke to the teacher after she asked why I'd been in detention that day. Person B. I never understood elementary school teachers who expect little kids to be perfectly quiet 100% of the time. My little brother got sent to the office probably 20 times one year for having hiccups in class. Granted, his hiccups sound pretty fake, but he's a smart enough kid to know that he shouldn't have faked hiccups in that class after getting sent to the office the first 5 times. I've personally been sent to the office for laughing, briefly, at a joke in a book during quiet reading time and kicking a chair, which my teacher classified as defacement of school property. Number 2. My high school had a no facial hair rule. They didn't seem to have a problem with sideburns though, so I would just grow huge sideburns in rebellion, basically a beard with a gap shaved in between and no mustache. Most teachers acknowledged it as a loophole and didn't care, but one teacher would always try to find me and send me home to shave. It amazes me thinking back on how much time she spent on the most harmless of rebellious teenage acts. Number 3. I was once working as a maintenance guy in an apartment building, temp work. I got my hand crushed in an elevator door, and while I was sitting in the lobby waiting for them to call an ambulance, a resident asked me what happened and I told them. Apparently, I was implying the facilities were unsafe and worrying a resident, which is grounds for firing. Number 4. When I was about 9, my classroom was the school's computer room, which had 30 computers and no ventilation. It was the middle of June and the entire class was melting. I stood up and turned on the tiny desk fan in the corner. Our teacher came into the room and demanded to know who turned on the fan. I stood up, she yelled at me saying that it was dangerous and sent me to the corridor, which is roughly the equivalent of detention to a 9-year-old. Number 5. In 2nd grade, I was partnered to do an assignment with a girl I wasn't particularly fond of. She sat a couple tables over. The assignment wasn't difficult, and I could do it on my own, so that's what I started to do. She made no move to come over to me, I made no move to go over to her, and a little while later she started working with the teacher helper lady. The teacher came to me and asked me why I wasn't working with her, and being a relatively shy kid at the time, I didn't know what to say. I was sent to the thinking chair where I bawled my eyes out, and subsequently transferred to another class the next day. Also, in 1st grade, I had a thing for coloring everything rainbow, scribbled every color in the crayon box all over. This was all fine, until I was given a picture of a street with shops lining it, colored it the same way, and the teacher got upset and made me redo it. Colored it black and gray, and this was okay. Number 6. In 6th grade I was really shy and didn't have any friends, no one seemed to like me. Anyway, I was in science class and the teacher kept yelling at me to be quiet. I wasn't talking. I got yelled at about 3 times and started to cry. I pulled my hands off my desk into my lap and dropped my eraser. I bent down to pick it up and the teacher ran across the classroom into my desk and started screaming at me for interrupting the classroom. Even though I didn't have any friends, the entire classroom stood up for me. The teacher apologized, but I still felt like shit. Number 7. This is something that I was told about by my parents, as I was too young to remember now. They went into my school to pick me up from kindergarten, and my teacher pulled my parents aside to tell them that I had done something that day. My mom told me her first thought was that I had gotten in a fight, or did something terrible. My teacher proceeds to tell them my problem. The teacher had apparently asked my class about what we all wanted to do when we grew up. Everybody else gave stereotypical answers like fireman, astronaut, etc. When it was my turn, I said that I wanted to be a stay-at-home dad, so I could be with my kids. This disturbed or angered my kindergarten teacher enough to pull my parents aside after school. Number 8. In 1st grade, I decided to start learning how to read Egyptian hieroglyphs. I got a book from the library, started teaching myself, and was actually learning at a rapid pace. I could easily read inscriptions after just 2 weeks, an hour or 2 every day. I would sometimes read in class. My teacher, Mrs. Summers, a bitch. But her husband was a genuine chemical engineer who would give the class demonstrations. He was always awesome, got wind of this, and had a meeting with my parents, where she told them about how learning another language can be detrimental to my development, and that this was obviously just another example of attention-seeking behavior that must be stopped. From then on, she had strict control over everything I was allowed to check out from the school library, and she didn't let me read anything. And that, ladies and germs, is how a 1st grade teacher literally did everything possible to compel a child to stop reading. Oh, and she also gloated about how all she had to do was call my parents and lie to get me punished. She literally said, "I just have to lift my phone, call your house, and say anything. I could lie if I wanted to and that's it. And I know what your father will do to you." Number 9. When I was 11, I was at my sister's high school graduation. The ceremony was held outside in the football stadium. As the ceremony droned on, my mom had set her camera case by her feet. She accidentally hit it with her foot and it fell below the bleachers. So I volunteered to retrieve it. When I reached the underside of the bleachers and grabbed the case, this old woman started screaming, "Thief! Thief!" It was loud enough for most people to hear and slightly threw off the graduation speaker. Well, she also attracted the attention of a cop and he grabbed me by the shoulder and brought me from under the bleachers. I had to lead him to my mom and he tried to convince her that he caught me stealing. But my mom had asked me to get it and she ripped the cop for interrupting the ceremony for her. The cop apologized and the old woman had followed us and my mom flicked her off. Then, when they left, she yelled at me for causing trouble. Number 10. My sister, 4 years my senior, was trying to catch bees in a Kinder Surprise toy container. I was standing behind her saying this is a bad idea. She got stung, ran inside, told our mother I'd been the one trying to catch bees and that she got stung trying to stop me, and I got smacked. I brought it up years later, and both mother and sister were mortified. Number 11. In 1st grade I decided to discover all the words that rhyme with duck in alphabetical order. After not getting very far, my mumblings were outed by some kid who shouted he said the F word. My teacher freaked out and sent me to the back of the class. I sat there, distraught, wondering what I had done wrong, and which word was the F word they spoke of. I was not the sharpest kid while in first grade. Number 12. Commenter. In kindergarten, while watching Bambi, everyone got really sad when his mom got shot. When I was confused by this and said, "Don't worry, it's not real. It's just a cartoon," I was sent to the corner for timeout. Person B. When I was 5 or 6, I was watching Bambi at a friend's house and, after that scene, her mother paused the tape and asked if we had any questions about what we had just seen. I responded with, "What's a thicket?" And she flipped out and accused me of being insensitive and rude. Number 13. In 6th grade I had bronchitis and would occasionally have these intense coughing fits that were really hard to stop. So one day during silent reading, one of these coughing fits comes on, and I try my best to silence it, but it goes on for 10 to 15 seconds. Well, my teacher got pissed and threatened to give me detention for playing the coughing game. Nothing came out of it, but I was a tender 6th grader and getting yelled at freaked me out. Number 14. Commenter. I got detention for changing the wallpaper on a school computer. My school sucked. Person B. I was banned from the computers for browsing the hard drive in the command prompt instead of the GUI. Person C. I have actually had something similar to that happen to me. Me and my friend were looking at everything in the command prompt, and a teacher had a mini heart attack and told us to stop hacking. Luckily, she didn't throw reason and logic out the window and listen, so there was no banning of computers. Number 15. In high school I was working with a friend on a PowerPoint project, and he got sick so he couldn't come to school. Well, the PowerPoint was saved on his school account so I couldn't work on it. To solve this problem he gave me his password, and I started working on the PowerPoint. About 45 minutes later the librarian came over and asked me whose account I was on. I told her I was on my friend's account so I could work on a project. She said, "Oh okay," and went back to her desk. Soon after that I left to go home, and on the way out the librarian asked me if I was doing anything inappropriate on the computer. I said no, which was completely true, I wasn't even on the internet, and left. Then the next day about halfway through first period I got called to the director's office. So I go and he starts yelling at me for hacking into other students' accounts. I tried to explain what actually happened, but he would have none of it. He then told me to leave so he could think of a punishment. About 2 hours later he called me back to his office and said I would lose all computer privileges for the rest of the school year. This was the worst thing that could have happened to me because I was about 4 classes that required me to use computers. So here I am worrying about how I'm going to be able to graduate on time, because it is now impossible to pass half my classes. So I ended up transferring to a new school so I could finish my engineering and programming classes. Number 16. When I was in 6th grade, I was tired so I yawned. I put my hand over my mouth, but I didn't go out of my way to stifle it. My teacher flipped out and said, "If this is too boring for you, you can take your chair and go sit out in the hall." I was never one to get angry at authority when I was a kid, but I got really pissed off about this. What? I wasn't allowed to be tired. Number 17. I was charged with truancy. I was actually brought to court, sat in front of a judge, was convicted and almost sent to juvie because I skipped school. Got 2 years probation. I was told it was the first case of truancy actually being brought to court in 50 years in Ontario. Well, the reason I skipped school. Kid I'd been bickering with said he was going to stab me. Next day, before I saw him, he'd been caught with a big hunting knife in his backpack. Kid was serious about killing me. What's more, the school deemed the knife for other things, completely dismissing his threat to me, and not even giving him a slap on the wrist. Zero tolerance policy, my big fat ass. I skipped for about a week before my mother noticed. When she found out what happened, she pulled me from the school and tried to have me transferred. The school kept saying that it was not a good enough reason to transfer me, and if she kept me out of school any longer they'd have to charge me with truancy. They did. Finally my mother just moved to the other side of the city, taking me out of their district so she could put me into another school. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time. Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe. If you dare. The home remedy she found was to use urine. I would pee into a diaper and place it on my face for 15 minutes. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. What is the worst advice you've ever received in your life? Number 1. I called Kids Help Phone when I was a teen to ask for advice on how to help my depressed friend. They advised me to find new friends. I wish I was making this up. To clarify, the conversation was very short. I explained my friend has been struggling, depressed with no motivation and isolating herself from others. Along those lines, it was a while back, and what can I do? The only piece of advice they gave me was to let her sort it out on her own and find new friends. That's it. Nothing to interpret or misinterpret, I don't think. We remained friends though, and she's alright now. Number 2. Get used to it. My old boss told me when 8 hours day shift job changed to variable 8 to 10 hours night shift. This would effectively remove me from spending time with my wife and young children. Took his advice as a catalyst to engineer the greatest adventure of my life. Transferred to a job across the country, hugely upgrading living conditions for my family. New boss, completely understanding the demands of a parent, adjust my work schedule accordingly. I am so thankful for my new boss, but I am even more thankful for my old boss, for giving me the worst advice I've ever received in my life. Number 3. When my daughter was an infant, my wife couldn't breastfeed and my daughter couldn't digest formula very well, so I had to buy a special pre-digested formula for like $25/can. I was at the cashier paying for the formula. The guy in front of me was gathering his things. He said to me, "When my kids were babies, I wish I knew what I know now." I was like, "What's that? What do you know?" He says, "Babies don't need formula. All they need is sugar water. All the rest is a scam." I was like, "I'm so glad you didn't know that back then." Number 4. My high school guidance counselor said that I wasn't college material, and I took her advice and started the process of joining the Marines with my friends, who were also told this. My chemistry teacher at the time scheduled a substitute, personally drove me to a nearby college, and sat there with me while I spoke with admissions. Fast forward a few years. After receiving a chemistry and chemical engineering dual degree and then going on to get a PhD in chemical engineering, I'd say that guidance counselor knew jack shit. My guidance counselor said I wasn't college material, and was proven to be full of shit. Number 5. In my final semester of college, my insanely jealous, distraught mother called me to make one last plea to get me to drop out. She went on to say, "What would you do if you had to watch helplessly as your own daughter threw her life away and became a nurse?" By the way, she married an elementary school dropout, and was a bitter retail worker. She couldn't handle watching me be the first in the family to graduate from college and make something of myself, and she dealt with it by constantly shaming me. If I scored 99% on something, she complained about the last 1%. If I got 100%, she said I was stupid because I didn't earn bonus marks. We don't talk anymore, and I'm a successful nurse. Number 6. Engineer, salaried, married with a kid. Also have a master's degree and several years of experience. The vice president of the company advised me to work at McDonald's after work if I wanted to make more money. He even took his calculator out and told me how many hours I should work. The guy was fired about a year after that for bullying employees. I tried to leave but ended up staying and turned down other jobs. Not a bad place to be for now. I spoke about it to a couple of senior executives I trusted at the time. Legally married to my beautiful wife. The kid is the result of said marriage. Just for the records. Number 7. When I was a teenager and had acne, none of the over-the-counter acne medicine was working. My mom brought me to a dermatologist and the medicine they prescribed was very expensive, so before buying it, my mom searched for any home remedies online. The home remedy she found was to use urine. The way to apply it was worse. My mom went to the store to buy supplies, and for over a month I would pee into a diaper and place it on my face for 15 minutes as part of my morning routine. Worst advice I've ever taken. Number 8. You shouldn't go to Japan if you don't know the language. I studied abroad and now work in Japan. Going to Japan without the language changed my life. It was a good learning experience, and you learn a language crazy fast when you need it every day. Number 9. My child is extraordinarily wild-hearted and intelligent, and difficult to parent. When she was 3, I was told to break her spirit so she would learn to obey. Her spirit is the best and brightest I've ever known. No exaggeration, I'd die to protect it. I don't take parenting advice from that person anymore. Number 10. A parent told me consistently throughout my childhood that I wasn't good at math because the parent wasn't good at math, and that math is just tricks that teachers use to make you feel stupid. I almost failed 8th grade math because I thought I was bad at it, Years later, after moving away, I eventually discovered I love logic, math, and general hard problem solving. I was good enough to get hired at Facebook and worked there as an engineer for years. I make more money than my entire family combined, largely using the skills I was strongly advised I didn't have. Number 11. Renting is just throwing money away. Sure, if you know for a fact that you'll be living in the same town for the next 10 plus years and have a steady income. Otherwise, stop rent shaming. Renting is a great option for people who are just starting out, move every few years, or are unsure where they want to end up. Repairs are the responsibility of the landlord, and you can save a lot of money, especially with a housemate or two. Number 12. I grew up in the Southeast. On my first day of elementary school, my mom dropped me off. Before I got out of the car, she told me to not hang out with Hispanics or black people because they will get me into trouble. The real kicker was that we are Mexicans who just moved from Mexico City to the US. Number 13. Keep in mind my mother was a child abuser who I haven't spoken to in almost 14 years. But when my second child was a toddler, she wasn't sleeping through the night and being defiant. My mother recommended I spank my baby in her crib, not sure how that's supposed to help her sleep. She also recommended I tie her to a chair when she refused to stay in timeout. She was dead serious. Needless to say, I did not follow her advice. She was never mean to my kids, but I got tired of her verbal abuse to me, so I stopped talking to her. Never look back and have zero regrets. Number 14. I was on probation in one state and my mother wanted me to move to her state. My PO said I had to wait on my papers. Mom bought me a plane ticket anyway and told me to just get on the plane, everything would be okay. When I told her I couldn't leave the state, much less move, until I had the okay, she said I was weak and that I didn't believe in the universe enough. Needless to say, I didn't get on the plane and all is well. Number 15. In 2005, at 26, I was told by everybody to buy a house in Sacramento. I picked out a brand new house to have built. I was driving to drop off the deposit. On the way there, I had a gut feeling not to buy, I just knew we were in a real estate bubble. So I ripped the check up and turned my car around and drove to my shitty in-law unit. I just knew the homes were not going to go up in value. Everybody told me I was a loser who didn't want to grow up. I was immature. My fiance's family, who all bought homes, told me I was an idiot who didn't want to grow up. The market crashed in 2007 and all of those homes in Sacramento we are foreclosed on, including my wife's family members, and now their credit was ruined. By 2009 the market bottomed out and instead of losing a home in Sacramento, I bought one in beautiful San Francisco, currently one of the hottest housing markets in the entire US. Now it's worth more than twice what paid in only 8 years. Now the same wife's family who gave me total shit advice in 2005 is trying to get me to sell my home in SF and buy a home in LA. Again, I'm sure the LA housing market will crash in a couple of years as well. So again, I'm getting told that I'm stupid and an idiot. Number 16. Worked at a restaurant chain as my first job. Worked my way up to supervisor when I was going to quit and go to college full time. Convo with the general manager, GM, went like this: me, going to start college in the fall. I will be leaving here around that time. GM, what do you mean? Me, I'm going to get a degree. GM, why? The only thing good about a college degree is it's a finer piece of paper to wipe your ass with. Went on to finish my degree. Restaurant closed down because of a cockroach infestation. Number 17. Don't care what others think of you is really bad advice, especially in adult life. While people mean it good when they say it, it's bad advice, because what people think about you and how they feel about you is a major part of your adult life. If people think you are stupid, mean and whatnot, even when it's not true, you won't get many opportunities in life. While you shouldn't just do what other people want you to do and how they want you to act, you still should do your possible best to keep people's opinion about yourself positive as much as you can. Number 18. I worked at a busy thrift store in the donation section when I was 15. My supervisor said I should rub up against the women in the narrow hall on my way to get boxes. I didn't do it. He told me I was a pussy and to watch how it's done. I watched him walk up behind a girl and rub up against her. She turned and punched him in the face. He told her she was fired. The manager came over and the surveillance camera showed what happened. He was fired. Number 19. Do the world a favor and never go into computers. That was the advice I got from my computer teacher back in high school in the mid-90s. It was more of a critique of my aptitude in class than general advice, but it was reinforced several years later by my web design teacher in college who gave me the second lowest grade of my academic career. Thankfully, I ignored both and went into computers and have been a web designer for the last 20 years. For bonus points, I picked up a side job teaching college and replaced my old web design instructor. Sadly, he did not remember who I was, but I enjoyed the moment, nevertheless. Number 20. When I was younger, I was constantly spraining my joints. First, my mom told me to sit out of rough play on the playground, which didn't help considering I was sitting in the library most of the time anyway, reading or doing homework. Then she decided I must be faking it and stopped caring about it. Told me to toughen up and just deal with it, because everyone has aches and pains and part of being an adult is working despite those. Turns out I have a condition that makes my joints super easy to dislocate. I'll have continuing problems throughout my life because I had injuries never treated as a child. Number 21. Dad, you shouldn't put your money in the bank, you should invest it in stocks. Look at all these Chinese stocks I bought from friends' recommendations. Me, broke university student with no income, that's a bad idea, Dad. Dad, what do you know? You should read more books like Poor Dad, Rich Dad. Me, no. That's a very bad idea. 2 years later, Dad got burned in the stock market. Dad, all stocks are bad, you shouldn't buy any mutual funds. Buy houses instead. Me, looks at my meager wage, I can't afford it, Dad, and I don't think you could either. Dad, what do you know? You should listen to real estate agents and get a realtor license. Me, with accounting designation, finance degree, and working in banking industry, this is really not a good time to buy. Dad, buys 3 houses. 3 months later, Dad, we can't buy any more houses, we can't afford them. Me, now with $2 million of mortgage, no shit. Dad, you should have listened to me. I vowed not to talk to my dad on money anymore. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time.